All right, guys, welcome to our next lecture here, Scientific Revolution. And, this is a little different than the last couple lectures. We were doing a lot of kings and rulers, and now we're kind of shifting away. At the same time, we have all these monarchs in England and France and Russia, Prussia, Austria. You also have the Scientific Revolution happening, which is, again, one of those key events in human history that we need to think about and talk about. And it's not as simple as just here's a bunch of scientists and this is what they did. Yes, you will need to know that, but there's a bit more to it. And so I want to start with this actually this time. Instead of a bunch of key words, some interesting critical questions to think about. And I don't know if you guys ever ponder these things, but here's a good one. Are science and religion opposing forces or complementary ones? A lot of times people think science and religion always butt heads, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. There are times we'll see during the scientific revolution where science and religion did not cooperate well. There are other times where science and religion do. Let me give you a couple of examples. You think of like something like the Big Bang Theory. And can you be a religious person and believe in the Big Bang Theory? And the answer is, of course, you can. You could argue that was God's way of creating everything. So, in that sense, it's not. Here's another very interesting idea, which is, kind of for some people, science is a religion and the issue of faith involving figuring out creation, right? In some ways, science helps. You can, and it's kind of a question to think of more than anything, but does science help argue for a creator? What do I mean by that? This is kind of stuff just to see if you ever think about this stuff, right? What do I mean by that? Well, does it take a leap of faith to believe there is a creator? And the answer to that is yes, of course, right? No, no, even the most religious person would say it's a leap of faith to believe there's a creator. But does it take a leap of faith to believe that there is no creator, that everything we have in our world today, the existence that we are, is all one big set of coincidences and accidents, which would be really remarkable because if you stop and you ponder, how many things needed to happen for us to exist, right? The atmosphere that we have has to be just right. The distance we are from the sun, the moon, the orbits, rotations, atoms, particles, it's just endless. It's an endless list of things that needed to happen. And if all that is one big set of coincidences and accidents, that is a big leap of faith as well. And I don't know if you ever think about stuff like that, but it's just interesting to ponder as well. So there's that element of it. So we'll see some of that as we go through this discussion here and in this lecture. And then this is another good question. Is science, or more precisely, are scientists always right? And are scientists always noble? We oftentimes think, oh, scientists they're scientists are people, right? Think of the Nazi doctors. They were scientists, right? Scientists are people. Some are good and some are bad. And is science always right? Are scientists always right? Well, scientists are not always right. It's pretty obvious. Let me give you a few examples of this. And it's this, that, at one point, the scientific community were certain that the liver circulated blood, not the heart. Well, we know that's not true. At one point, the scientific community was sure that the Earth is the center of the universe. Again, we know that's not true. And at one point, the scientific community was sure the atom was the smallest particle. And again, we know that's not true. And you go, well, that's all old stuff. Well, here, look at this. This is Time Magazine cover, 1976, Coming Ice Age, 2006, Global Warming. And if I were to find another one today, it'd probably just say climate change on it. And so when I was a kid in 1980s, I still remember learning, oh, ice age coming, it's going to be here. And then it was global warming. And the same scientific community was certain about it. And so what I think is really important, look at the COVID situation. How many times just in months the information we're getting from scientists changed from don't use masks to use masks to how it's transferred and how dangerous it is. And it's not that the science is an issue. I think very often because a scientist, somebody who is a expert or in a white coat says something, we all just say, okay. And I think that's the key point. Not that science is a problem. Science is great. My God, without science, we'd be living in a pretty horrible world. So science gives us medicine and technology and all these wonderful things. But we also have to be aware historically and even currently that there is this always questioning that needs to be done. And one of the things in the field of science you should never hear the term is the debate is over. There's no such thing as the debate is over in science. That's what science does. And so we're going to look at some of the early figures of the scientific revolution. So that first few minutes there is just kind of making more think about things. And again, it doesn't matter what your thoughts are or what you agree or disagree with regarding any of that. It's more, do you think about these things, right? That's what I like to throw out there sometimes for students to do. So let's get to our keywords. And these are going to start with just some causes. Why does the scientific revolution begin in the 1600s? So we'll go through all the causes of the scientific revolution very briefly here, and then we'll start looking at specific scientists. And you will need to know them, and what I would recommend is maybe when you're done, make yourself a chart. You know how last time I made a chart for you guys on absolutism and constitutional monarchy? Maybe when this lecture is over, you create another chart on scientists, and you would just do something like this, and you'd have 1, 2, 3, right? And so you have the name of the person we're going to talk about, their date, and then what they did. And then for each person, you kind of do this, and then you could do this on your own. I could create more charts for students. Sometimes I do, and you will get a few more charts. But really, if you make your own, that's a lot better. But anyways, we'll get to that. Let's talk about the causes first. Black Death. Now, again, it's not just to be able to list them. When you say why are these causes, that's what I want you to know. So the Black Death is a cause for obvious reasons. Half of Europe had died. You probably want to figure out why that happened. And so again, hey, look at the COVID situation. Is it spurring a lot of science? Of course. Look at all the attempts, this rapid attempt to try to find vaccines and medicines and treatments for it. It's natural, right? I mean, you want to try to cure things that ail you. It's just how things work. So the Black Death, a lot of people died, and so you're going to have a lot of people wanting to figure out why that is. A second cause is the printing press, and we kind of talked about that before. The printing press helps create more literacy, more education. It also helps spread ideas. So, science builds on one another. So once one scientist comes up with something, so then they can spread it, more people can hear about it, and then they can learn about it, and then they advance on that. So that's another cause. Here's one we don't often think about, but is actually a cause of the scientific, maybe not so much the scientific revolution back then, but definitely science today. And I say, like, when does the scientific revolution end? And really hasn't. It's still going on. And it's money. And what I mean by that? Well, again, think of medicine. Think of all the medicines and pills that help us live longer and stay healthier, and drugs and vaccines and all that. If you don't think there's a monetary motivation for people to come up with these things, you're kidding, right? If somebody is told you could become a millionaire if you find the next cure, the next this or next that, you're going to be very motivated to do that. Competition sometimes I say produces excellence, and it's true. And yes, you would like to think it's all done for noble purposes. And there are a lot of people who do science and medicine for noble purposes, is a wonderful thing. But is this also motivation? Yes, right? Pretty obvious. The next cause is the Renaissance itself. And why is the Renaissance a cause of the scientific revolution? Well, remember, the Renaissance is the rebirth of the Greco-Roman world. And if you know anything about the Greeks and the Romans, they developed a lot of science and mathematics. Pythagoras, Archimedes, medicine, Hippocratic growth, right? All that, all these Greeks and Romans, they came up with a lot of stuff. And so they're studying these ideas again in the Renaissance. So they're kind of developing and saying, hey, let's see what these guys wrote. And then they expand on them. So that's a cause. Exploration, right? Remember the years 1400 to 1600, right? All of that period, that was the age of exploration. And as people are exploring, how does this help bring about the scientific revolution? Well, you need a faster way from point A to point B. You need better ships, better sails, better food supplies, right? All these things that you're going to need to be able to explore. And then another factor is when you explore, you come in contact with new people, new ideas. You bring those ideas back home and you build with those. So exploration is there. And then I just put exploration again, exploration in human nature. And what I mean by human nature, just our constant desire to improve our lives, to do better. It's just how we're wired, right? If we find a way to live to 60, we want to live to 70. If we find a way to live to 70, we want to live to 80, right? So I think just human nature. So these are all the things that are happening in the 1600s, right? 1500s, as the Black Death obviously earlier. And these are the things that help fuel the scientific revolution. So that's why the scientific revolution happens. Now we can begin to talk about some of the actual early scientists. So here now you're going to get a lot of names, right? So you're going to get their names. You want to know the name of the person. You want to know anything they wrote. If I give you the name of what they wrote, and you want to know their ideas. We're not going to spend a lot of time on any one of them, but there's several you're going to need to know. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there'll be like 8, 9 of these scientists you need to know, and any of these are fair game for the quiz, right? So you definitely want to know them. All right, here we go. So here's our keywords too. We'll just start with some scientists as they relate a lot to astronomy and a couple other things here. So get all these words down. Okay, so we'll start with that. I'll start on this slide and then we'll move forward, but make sure you get all of them down as we go through them. And so the first person I want to talk about is Copernicus from Poland. And Copernicus is most famous for his heliocentric statement in 1520. When he comes up with it, he's actually not published till 1543, and then he dies the very next year. And what is the heliocentric statement? Very simple, that the sun, not the earth, is the center of the universe. Now, he's not exactly right, right? The sun is the center of the solar system, not the universe, but it's a lot closer than what people had before. So that's it. Like I said, there's a lot of these people we don't need to spend a lot of time on. As long as you know Copernicus, know he develops a heliocentric statement, you know what it is, you're good to go, right? So that's Copernicus. And it is Copernicus who first comes up with this idea, not the next name you see here, Galileo, right? So Galileo, he develops what Copernicus did. He's a little bit later Galileo, and he's in the 1500s, early 1600s. He wants to say circa 1600 is fine for Galileo. And in the early 1600s, he is able to kind of advance what Copernicus did. He has an extra help because of this guy named Lippershey. Who is Lippershey? Well, Lippershey is the guy who invents the telescope. Galileo improves upon it, but Lippershey is the one who invented it. So I'm going to move on to the slide. So hopefully you have all these words down. If not, pause, get the rest of these words down so you can see some slides. But this is the early telescope. Not exactly Hubble, but still a telescope that Hans Lippershey again created. Is just kind of know that Lippershey created the telescope, and then Galileo will use it. Galileo will use this to observe the skies, and there's Galileo, of course. And he writes a couple of works. One is called Starry Messenger. The other was called The Dialogue Concerning the Two Principal Systems of the World. So you should have those written down again in your keyword section. And in both of these ideas, he basically says, yeah, the Earth's going around the sun, which of course leads to a problem because of where Galileo was from. Galileo was from Italy, and it was the center of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was not happy. So this is an example of where the church and science did have conflict. And the Catholic Church says, well, no, it doesn't. Galileo says, yes, it does. And Galileo got in trouble for this. And of course, he was put in house arrest. He was forced to recant his view. This kind of backfired on the Catholic Church because by now, most people understood Galileo was correct, and it kind of made the Catholic Church look not too good. Eventually, the Catholic Church kind of says, yeah, Galileo was correct, but that takes quite a while. And so this was an example of where the church and science did not agree. However, I don't want you to think that was always the case. There was, of course, the next name on the list there, a man named Descartes. I don't have a picture of him for you, but Descartes, he was a scientist in the mid-1600s, and he was from France, and he did a lot of mathematics. And Descartes, he argued that math and proves that religion exists, that God exists, he says. And the reason he kind of comes up with this idea, Descartes does, is he says, look at the laws of mathematics. There's perfection to it, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4. And he says, look at our world. There's perfection in the way things work. And then he says, well, look at human beings. Are we perfect? And of course not. Nobody, no, there's no perfect human beings. None of us are perfect. Yet there are these perfect laws, Descartes says. And therefore, he says, if we could observe perfection inside the areas of math and science, therefore there must be some sort of perfect creator, because again, you can't have that perfection just randomly appear. So that's kind of how Descartes would use math and science to argue for a creator, while in the case of Galileo, you saw a conflict between the church and the state. So this is what I mean by sometimes there's cooperation and sometimes there is conflict. All right, so those are the first few set of names you need to know. So Copernicus, Galileo, Lippershey, and Descartes, right? As long as you know all 4 of those, you're so far good to go. Keep going with the video. All right, so we're going to move on. Next set of keywords, medicine. So this is the next set of words here have to do with the scientific revolution and medical advancements. So let's talk about a few of these names. We'll start with this guy named William Harvey. Again, get them all down. Pause if you need to. William Harvey. William Harvey wrote on the circulation of blood, and he is known as the father of modern physiology. Again, remember, you're not just writing down the words. Everything I'm saying about him, you're getting down too. He is from England, right? I don't put every single term and phrase down here, so I'm just putting the keywords and you jot down the information. He's from England. You're going to have a lot of scientific revolutionary figures from England. England had a lot of universities, a lot of schools, Cambridge, Oxford, you may have heard of them. And so there's a lot of people that came out of this higher education system they had there. He's from Cambridge, actually, William Harvey. And basically on the circulation of blood is his essay where he describes how blood flows through the body, and you go, all right, what's the big deal? Well, this is important. If you don't understand that, how can you do surgeries? How can you do medicine? You can't do it effectively. So that's an important person, William Harvey. Another person very important in medicine is this man named Leeuwenhoek. Pretty crazy spelling. And this is the deal, when you get to your first quiz and you have to type your answers in, and I say, who invented the microscope? And you would write Leeuwenhoek. It's open note, open book. I'm hoping because of that you could spell them well. If you misspell it by a letter or two, will I still give you credit? Yeah, as long as you're close. If you're way off, no, especially since it is open book and open note. So just get it down and get it close. And so you should be fine. All right, so anyways, Leeuwenhoek invents the microscope, which is important also for medicine because he observes these kind of one-celled animals, which are essentially germs, viruses, bacteria, whatever that is, that, people can see now and go, hey, maybe I need to wash my hands before I help somebody give birth or whatever it is, right, before I do surgery. So you have these kind of 2 guys, William Harvey and Leeuwenhoek, are really important for medicine. Who's this William Huson guy? I'm sure no one's ever heard of him. This gets more of a funny little story. So I don't want you to think that you have Harvey, you have Leeuwenhoek, and you have all of a sudden this flourishing of great medicine and things being done. Not really, because even in the 1800s, it was still illegal in England, for example, to do autopsies on body. It wasn't until 1832, until you get what is called the Anatomy Act, that allowed people to perform autopsies. Now, it doesn't mean people weren't doing it before 1832. They were just doing it illegally. How would they do this? Well, they would go and they would, dig up graves. And they would dig up graves and then they would do autopsies. The problem with digging up a grave is if you don't get it fresh, the autopsy isn't going to be as good. And so what some people were doing is, you ready for this? This is what I mean, not all scientists are noble. They actually killed people. They found peasants, they killed them, and then they did, studied their bodies and stuff. And it was very illegal, of course, whether you didn't kill them or grave digging. And so sometimes they would have to hide their bodies, whatever they did, under their places where they lived. So what does this have to do with William Huson? Well, William Huson lived in England, and he had a little house there. And in fact, he was one of these people who was doing these things illegally. I don't think he killed anybody, but he did perform autopsies illegally, and then he hid them under his garden. Why is this an interesting story? Well, the same house that William Huson lived in was later lived in by Benjamin Franklin, somebody I'm assuming you've all heard of before, one of our great leaders. So Benjamin Franklin, was living there, and after Benjamin Franklin lived in this house, people were like, oh, let's see what's there, and they find all these bones, right? And they go, what the heck is Franklin doing, right? And we know Benjamin Franklin's into science and stuff, but was he doing all this? Well, then people researched it and found that these were not Franklin's really weird experiments, that this was this guy named William Huson who was actually doing that before. So anyways, just a little funny side story. Now, the other point I want to tell you again is, yes, you have Leeuwenhoek, yes, you have Harvey, yes, you have other fields of medicine, but I don't want you to think that this is just all wonderful medicine. This is an image of something I've been to. It's called the Operating Theatre, 1800s Operating Theatre in London in the 1800s. So guys, this is in the 1800s. This is where they perform surgeries. You would lie on this wooden bench, right? It's a theater, so people would actually stand up here and observe, and they would watch this all being done. And then let me show you an image of the tools. These were operating tools in the 1800s. So, not exactly the best, the best situation in terms of medicine in the 1800s. But still, better than what they had in the Middle Ages in terms of understanding science. At least they understanding how the blood flows through the body and all of that good stuff. All right, so you have a couple more names there you needed to know. All right, here is our last set of names I want you to know in terms of the scientific revolution. Sir Francis Bacon, Newton, and Edward Jenner. So 3 more people you'll want to know. All right, so Francis Bacon, again, also from England, he is one person, not alone, that helps develop what is called the scientific method. All right, so that's important. If any of you have ever taken a science class, I'm sure you've learned about the scientific method. You don't just get to observe something and draw a conclusion. I don't know, I'm sure you'll learn this in some class at some point, but causation and correlation are not the same thing. Just because somebody does A and you have B as a result doesn't mean A caused B, right? Because a million other things could have caused B. And if you follow again anything during the medical crisis, the COVID time period, you will see, well, okay, we do this, then this doesn't happen. But is it because of this or because of some other factor, right? You don't know, because that's not how science is done. Science has to be much more through methods and experiments and data collection and all of these things. You don't just observe something and come to a conclusion. So Sir Francis Bacon, along with others, not alone, creates a scientific method. Next guy is Newton. Newton, of course, wrote a couple things. One of his most famous things is called Principia, so that's what he wrote. Newton, also from England, also from Cambridge University. Obviously, gravity, right? The 3 laws of Newton. I'm not going to go through the 3 laws of Newton with you. You don't need to know them. But do know, obviously, he does begin to develop the ideas of gravity. He begins to develop a lot of calculus. So if you hate calculus, you could blame Newton. I always did so great in math until I got to calculus and it just stopped making sense. But these things are important. Without this, if we don't understand gravity that Newton and then other people build on, we can't do things. We can't do satellites. We can't understand orbits. We can't fly planes. And so this is what I mean by, I think I've mentioned before, the contributions that this stuff we learn in this class does impact us today. We saw some of that during the Renaissance lecture. We're seeing some of this in the Scientific Revolution lecture. You'll see it again when you talk about the Enlightenment, and as we go through all semester, we're going to see how so many things happen in modern Western civilization that impact us today. So obviously something I want you to know. So Newton, gravity, Principia, you know that, you're good to go. And then finally, the last name, Edward Jenner. He's a little bit later. Technically, he's after the scientific revolution period, but again, I kind of say the scientific revolution period doesn't end. That takes us all the way to like the 1700s. Is when Jenner develops a vaccine for smallpox, which is not small, pardon the pun, because the smallpox vaccine was deadly. It was one of the deadliest diseases in human history. How many people have died from smallpox in the last several generations? Nobody, anywhere in the world, because Edward Jenner comes up with a vaccine. Now, coming up with a vaccine is not enough. Then you need to be able to mass produce it. Then you need to have the moral will to distribute it around the globe. And those are things that Western civilization will do over, a century time period. But Edward Jenner, I always kind of throw him in there because inventing the smallpox vaccine is pretty important. So anyways, these are some of the key people. And again, I ran through a lot of them. There isn't a lot of information, but I hope you can see how you can come up with a lot of questions on the first quiz from this. So, who invented the smallpox vaccine? Edward Jenner. Who, helped develop the scientific method? Sir Francis Bacon. Or I could ask it the other way around. Newton wrote what? Principia. Principia was written by who? Newton. So there's many ways to answer these that I can ask questions on your first quiz. Again, so this is where, again, I would recommend maybe making a little chart to help you study where you would put the name of the person that we just discussed, right? There was quite a few of them. You give maybe a date, a circa date, right? D-A-T-E, and then, what they did would be here, or what they wrote, and then you would just kind of make a bunch of rows, and very helpful. I think it might be a good technique. I always suggest this to all my students online or traditional classes, and the students who do this end up doing better. Students who just kind of just reread your notes, you're not going to do as well. So definitely you want to kind of use that for your advantage. All right, so that's the scientific revolution. One last slide. Questions to ponder for our next lecture. So we're done with the scientific revolution, and the next topic is going to be the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is very important because, like the scientific revolution, people are challenging, but it's not challenging medicine and science and astronomy. They're challenging politics, human nature, religion itself, economics. And so to help us understand what the individuals of that time were doing, I want you to ask yourself what all the wars in the 20th century had in common. So first of all, you have to think of the wars in the 20th century. So, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Cold War. It could be anywhere in the world. Iran-Iraq War, Afghan wars, Russia-Afghan wars, wars in the Middle East, Yom Kippur War, if you're familiar with that, 1967 War, Six-Day War, if you're familiar with that. And so I kind of want to ask yourself, what do all these wars have in common? And just kind of think about that a little bit before you watch the next video. And we're going to answer that, and I'll show you how it relates to the Enlightenment. All right, so I hope that's all clear. Make sure you're studying really well. And other than the quiz coming up, we're going to eventually start getting to midterm information as well. So more and more stuff coming at your way. So keep on top of things and let me know if you have any questions. Don't fall behind. Thank you.